Hello everyone and welcome to CITS3004 Cybersecurity. We are having an interesting year this year, as you've probably seen in the LMS notice that all the lectures this year is going to be online. So you can find all the lecture videos through the LMS or the YouTube link that I provided there. So you can use whichever you prefer. Yeah, so let's get started. In this video, I'm going to cover about the admin stuff, like who's teaching, what's the schedule, what's the assessments, and so forth. Okay, so this unit, I am the unit coordinator. I will provide all the lecture videos for you and organize assessments, labs, and so forth. Okay, but we do have two lab facilitators that are helping us get through the lab stuff. They are Alex and Ty. So if you have any questions regarding the labs and either Alex or Ty is your lab facilitator, you can contact them first to clarify. Okay, so even if it's not within your lab time, you can still email them and they will get back to you when they are available, right? So they don't particularly have offices, but obviously we can easily contact through online, so that's the way to go. Right. So timetable kind of looks like this. Usually we had a 2-hour slot for face-to-face lectures, but now it's all online, so just keep that in mind. And normally I will have an office hour that I leave everyone to vote, so I will set that up and you can have a vote, and after first week I will use that time slot for people to use as my office hours. But obviously coming to campus can be quite a hassle, especially if you are quite far away or even overseas. So you can always email me to arrange another time or a different method to have a consultation with me. For example, have a Zoom meeting. Yeah. So people allocated for those labs. I will be taking one of the labs on Wednesdays, but otherwise Alex and Ty will be going around doing some different labs. Those will be their main labs they'll be looking at, but depending on their time schedules, they may change around a little bit, but that shouldn't be too much of a concern. Yep. The Monday one is highlighted as a green one because that one is reserved in case the number of enrollments goes up very high. At the moment, it's looking okay, but if the numbers go up any higher, we will open that up so that people can use that lab time as well. Okay. So the assessments, right? So we have largely 3 divided components in the assessment: assignments, test, and exam. And the assignment breaks down further into 2 components: labs and projects. Okay. So labs are weekly labs. There are a total 10 labs, which each one is worth 1%. So that adds up to 10% total. We'll have a project. I'll give you those details a bit later, which adds up to 20%, and the remaining test and exam add up to 20 and 50% respectively. Okay, so let's have a look at our schedule now. So in term 3, that's the before the semester break. It's funny how it's divided into first 9 weeks. I think that's quite long. Nevertheless, they always try to align the holiday. What's in the holiday? I can't remember. Nevertheless, yeah. So we'll go straight all the way through the first week, 9 weeks, covering these items. The lecture titles are a little bit broad in these overviews because I like to change a little bit at a time in each week. Although if you have access to, for example, last year's materials, you may see most of them probably stay the same, but sometimes I would like to change the components here and there, like, update and add some new stuff in there. Okay, and also you'll see the corresponding labs. Please note that labs starts next week. Okay, or if you're watching this in the first week, lab starts this week. Okay, basically with starting from the first week. Okay, there will be a test. I'm thinking maybe week 7 or possibly week 8, depending on how we can schedule our test. So I'm not sure how the restrictions going to ease out, but if it does ease out, we may be possible to have in like a in-person invigilated test. Otherwise, we may convert to a ExamSoft. So we have been told that we can use ExamSoft for mid-sem tests. So I'll look into that option. But otherwise, the next component is the project assignment. The project assignment will be given out typically after test, but normally around week 7 or 8 as well. And usually you will have about 4 weeks to complete them. So moving over to the next one. So the assignment is typically due second to last week of the semester or on the last week of semester. That's including the break. Sometimes people take a break. Yeah, that's fine. But if you don't make much progress before the break, be prepared to spend some additional hours to get it done, because normally these take some time. So just keep that in mind, and don't just push it till the end because you have a bit of a time to complete it, because it is quite time-consuming task to do. Okay. Otherwise, we'll finish up with the unit overview stuff in week 12, and of course there will be a lab catch-up in the last week for you to finish off the last remaining lab. Okay. Otherwise, then we'll have the break, and then we move on to the exam. Okay, so hopefully that's pretty clear. So we have, I'll say, a bit heavy on the side of prerequisites. So you need to know, ideally, all of those, Java, Python, and C. Python, we try to use Python as the main, but sometimes some concepts cannot be done using Python. For example, later if you do buffer overflows, you need to use a language that doesn't do boundary checks, and in this case, Python is not applicable. So we use C instead, for example. And then for some other applications that we use, maybe Java-based, because Java has been around for a long time, so there's a lot of Java-related softwares, so we might use that. Okay, so just keep that in mind. We're a little bit flexible on various languages that we use and different techniques. It's just a matter of you having the base knowledge, so that when you need to use some skills in different languages, you will be easy to catch that up. So in addition to that, you should understand the basics of the networks, because we're dealing with security. Usually, security implies there are 2 or more parties involved. There are attackers and defenders, or the victims, you might say, right? And therefore, there are some sort of a network relationship between those parties. And so having some knowledge in computer networks is very ideal here. I will try to provide some basic understandings of the networks, especially when we do the network attacks. But in this unit, I do assume that you have some basic knowledge in computer networks. Okay. There are some background materials on those programming languages on LMS. So if you browse through and click bits and pieces, you'll find it. In general, you scroll down, there's a background material. And if it ever loads, there we go. Okay, so we have C's, Pythons, and Javas, and some math stuff. So yeah, you can revise yourself on those things there. And if you are concerned about your prerequisite skills, you're welcome to come and talk with me. I will try to give you some general guidelines and whatnot, but yeah, if you are concerned, let me know, and we can have a look and see whether I think that you will have sufficient prerequisites to do well in this unit or not. Okay. I did get some interesting feedback last year. For instance, this is one of the feedback that I got from a student. Students with no prior knowledge of Python C were allowed in this unit despite heavily relying on them during some of labs. Because they were not made as a mandatory prerequisite as units, doesn't mean we don't use it. So just like how I explained in the previous slide that we do have those prerequisites, it means if you don't think you have sufficient knowledge in those, I would suggest you to, take some other units in those prerequisite areas and then come back and take this in subsequent year or so. Okay, so that's the recommendation here. So please don't leave such feedback, because I have provided sufficient, I believe, sufficient information for you to make a decision based on your understanding of your prerequisite to whether continue in this unit or not. Okay, so hopefully that's clear. I have some other comments that I received in the past. For example, there's too much emphasis placed on attack techniques that are no longer common. No one is encrypting their message with old ciphers, for instance. So basically what they're saying is the skills that you learned in the lectures is too basic, but you have to note that materials taught in this unit forms the fundamental blocks of constructing your attacks and mitigations. So later, when you learn more advanced techniques, for example, in crypto, you learn about DS, AES, but if you look underneath how they're built using classical ciphers. You'll understand this better later on. But basically, if you don't understand how Virginia cipher works, you will not understand how AES works. Okay? So AES has a lot of different mixture of classical ciphers underneath, but it just has a lot of cycles to get through. That's what makes them really complex. So that's a typical example that I could give, saying that these basic skills are actually fundamental blocks for you to understand more advanced stuff. So that's why I think they are important for you to learn, and then later you can learn more about advanced stuff, because at the end of the day, in the labs you do practice and handles more advanced crypto techniques or attacks or defense, but if you only know how to use tools without understanding the basics, then later if the tools change or techniques change, we have a new breakthrough, for example, in quantum computing, you should still know the basics to properly implement them. Otherwise, it's going to be quite troublesome if you need to troubleshoot some bugs or errors that are happening that require you to understand exactly what's happening under the hood. Okay, so please keep that in mind. Assignments, starting off with the labs, as mentioned, it's a weekly lab, excluding week 6 and 12. 6 is left empty for you to study for the test, but I might change that to week 7 depending when I schedule it, but I will likely to schedule it for week 7. And week 12, there's no new labs, but it's left there for you to catch up with the remaining lab stuff that you may have. Okay. Everything is on LMS, so if you go to the Labs tab, you will find all of them there. As mentioned before, total is 10%, 1% each. Okay, and it's done mostly during the lab times, ideally, but you're also welcome to complete them in your own time. And in the past, people do spend more than the allocated 2 hours. Roughly between, most people spent about, they said, about 3 to 4 hours, but depending on your prerequisites, you may end up spending more than that. So for example, if you find lab 1, you end up spending 5, 6 plus hours. you can expect to have that much difficulty in other labs, because lab 1 is one of the easiest ones that you can get through. Okay, so just keep that in mind and try to reevaluate whether you have the sufficient knowledge, like programming skills or computer networks, to carry on with this unit. Okay. All the labs are individual assessments, so just keep that in mind. So you have to submit your own solutions to each LMS, but you are allowed to discuss how to solve them with your peers. So I highly encourage you to talk with peers about, see how to go about solving specific questions given. But just remember that if someone gives you answers only, that means specific answers to answer the questions on LMS, then they are only distracting your learning, which means you don't get the full understanding of the mechanism behind how people solve those questions. So when it comes to tests and exams, you will not be able to explain them in a comprehensive manner. So will you risk 1% lab to compromise your 20% test or 50% exam? And that will be the question up to you. Okay. Anyway, here states open book. Google is your friend, of course, right? So there's a lot of things you're allowed to look up and see how things can be done. You'll find that I like to set all of my assessments as an open book, typically. So you'll find the mid-sem test to be open book, exam to be open book, projects open book, everything open book. But in invigilated scenarios, you are typically only allowed to take notes. Any lecture materials or notes or whatever you handwritten are possible, but you are not supposed to access online materials or talk or communicate with your peers during those assessments. So in the test and exam, you can have any materials you want to access as like a printed or hand notes, whatever, but you are not allowed to talk with others and discuss the solutions. Okay, just keep that in mind. Okay. The projects, typically it's a cyber tech topic we do. This year we're thinking of doing CTF, so it's not WTF, but CTF. Please look it up if you're not sure what it is. Thinking of releasing it around week 8, and as mentioned, typically due week 11 to give that extra 1 week for late submissions as well. This will be worth 20%. However, the details are still coming, so stay tuned. Okay. Mid-semester tests. This is typically an hour-long test in week 7 or so. Please note that lecture videos will still be released, and you are allowed to use all the lecture slides up to the point during the test, as because it's an open book. I mentioned here that it's likely to happen on Wednesdays 5 to 6. However, I don't think I updated that since last year, so please ignore that. Haha. Yeah. So it will cover materials up to week 7, but not including. So first half of the semester will be accessible in the mid-semester test. And of course, exam 50% covers everything. It's going to be open book, 2 hours long. Course summary will cover possible questions in week 12. So in week 12, I will go over some questions that I asked in the past. So if you see them in my week 12, that means I will highly unlikely to ask the same questions. But anyway, we'll keep that for later. So here's an important one, but I will leave this for you to read. I hope that's quite self-explanatory. So because exams and tests are only the 2 invigilated components, where everything else you can pretty much just work with your peers or just grab answers. So I like to put some restrictions on minimum marks on invigilated items that you must pass. Okay, so that's what it's describing here. So finally, I have a copyright notice. This is to ensure that all the materials that I use is part of the UWA copyright, but also I use some materials from online, but with this Copyright Act, it's all covered. Okay. Otherwise, I hope this year goes all right with online lectures. Typically for this unit, online lectures is not my preferred method of delivery. So I have pushed to get my labs face-to-face because otherwise I think it's going to be very difficult. Anyway, we'll see how it goes. I'll see you in the next video. Bye!